September 1944, Western Pacific, 22:11 hours. The sea was black glass. No moon, no aircraft, no flares staining the sky, only the low mechanical hum of turbines and the soft rush of water along steel hulls. The earlier exchange of gunfire had faded into memory. Smoke had thinned. Radar scopes showed nothing immediate within threat range. On the Japanese flagship, the watch officer lowered his binoculars. "Surface clear." Reports echoed from accompanying cruisers and destroyers. Lookouts confirmed empty horizons. Hydrophones detected no unusual propeller signatures nearby. Radar sweeps returned only friendly formations. The admiral nodded. Enemy units had disengaged. The night was silent. Formation spacing loosened slightly. Destroyers adjusted speed for fuel economy. Gunnery crews relaxed from immediate readiness, not careless, but no longer expecting contact within minutes. Darkness breeds assumption. An assumption at sea can be dangerous. Miles away beyond visual range, beyond what lookouts could detect, American ships maintained steady course. They had not retreated far. They had repositioned deliberately, allowing the Japanese formation to relax into perceived control. Inside an American cruiser's combat information center, radar scopes glowed with clarity. Multiple contacts, large and small, were visible as defined returns. Bearings were steady, range closing slowly. Unlike the Japanese bridge, the Americans were not looking at empty sea. They were looking at structure. Every Japanese vessel appeared as a distinct echo, separated cleanly from surrounding water. Course and speed were tracked continuously. Firing solutions were already forming. No searchlights pierced the night. No warning shots signaled approach. The Americans did not need visual confirmation. Radar had replaced it. At 22:19 hours, the American task group adjusted slightly, tightening formation without increasing speed dramatically. The maneuver was subtle, designed to preserve surprise. On the Japanese flagship, confidence remained intact. The admiral dictated a short signal to higher command. Engagement concluded, area quiet, night secure. It was a reasonable conclusion. There were no flashes on the horizon. No incoming shells. No visible silhouettes. Only darkness and disciplined formation moving steadily through it. Then, inside the American cruiser, the gunnery officer spoke calmly. Target range confirmed, solution stable. The captain gave a single order. Commence fire. Moments later, the night shattered. Heavy caliber shells tore across open water before a single Japanese lookout saw the source. Explosions erupted near the lead cruiser's bow, violent, precise, unexpected. There had been no warning. No visual contact. Only impact. The Japanese fleet had declared the night silent. Radar had known otherwise. And in modern naval warfare, silence no longer meant absence. It meant someone else was watching first. The first Japanese reaction was confusion. Lookouts scanned desperately for muzzle flashes. Searchlights remained dark for a crucial few seconds. No one wanted to illuminate their own ships without confirming target direction. But the shells were already landing. The second American salvo struck tighter. One round smashed into the superstructure of a forward cruiser, tearing through communications equipment before detonating inside. Another erupted off the port quarter, sending steel fragments across exposed deck positions. Still no visible enemy. The gunfire had come from beyond sight. On the Japanese flagship, radar operators scrambled to refine returns. Their sets showed faint contacts at longer range, but not with the clarity the Americans enjoyed. Interference from friendly ships and smoke cluttered the display. Meanwhile, the American plotting rooms were calm. Range updates flowed steadily. Bearing adjustments were minimal. The Japanese formation had not yet begun aggressive maneuver because it did not know exactly where to turn. That hesitation created stability, and stability made targeting easier. A third salvo roared outward from the American cruiser group. This time, the shells bracketed the lead destroyer screen. Water columns rose in disciplined sequence. One destroyer took a direct hit amidships. Flame burst outward as secondary ammunition ignited. Now the Japanese commanders understood. They were being engaged from beyond visual contact. Searchlights snapped on suddenly, beams slicing across smoke and darkness. But illumination revealed only friendly hulls and drifting debris. The Americans remained just outside optical reach. The Japanese fleet began a coordinated turn toward the densest radar return, east-northeast. Engines surged, formation tightened. That maneuver, necessary for survival, provided the Americans exactly what they needed. Predictable geometry. As the Japanese ships pivoted together, their bearing shifts updated cleanly on American radar. Fire control solutions recalculated in seconds. The next salvo landed not where the ships had been, but where they were turning. Another cruiser absorbed a heavy hit along its upper deck. A destroyer attempting to widen screen spacing found itself bracketed before torpedo tubes aligned. The night was no longer silent. It was structured by invisible information. On the Japanese flagship, the admiral realized the battle had never ended. The Americans had not retreated, they had repositioned beyond sight, relying entirely on radar-guided gunnery. Darkness, once a shield, had become a vulnerability, because the fleet that could see without light owned the night. And as explosions continued to march across the formation, the illusion of emptiness collapsed completely. The sea had looked quiet, but radar had been drawing lines through it the entire time. By 27 hours, the Japanese fleet committed fully to a coordinated turn toward the eastern threat axis. It was the correct doctrinal response: close distance, establish visual contact, bring full gunnery weight to bear. Long-range harassment could be broken by decisive aggression. But aggression requires orientation, and orientation was incomplete. The American ships were not fixed on a single bearing. While the primary cruiser group maintained pressure from the east-northeast, a secondary unit adjusted slightly southward, quietly tightening the engagement geometry. As the Japanese formation pivoted east, their western quarter widened. Radar aboard the American ships reflected the maneuver cleanly, each hull shifting in smooth arcs. Fire control computers recalculated continuously. The next salvo from the Southern American unit arrived seconds after the turn stabilized. Shells slammed into a cruiser's exposed flank, an angle previously shielded by formation spacing. Steel ruptured along the outer plating. A fire control director went dark instantly. The Japanese fleet had turned toward one threat and revealed itself to another. Destroyers attempted to widen outward to restore screening arcs, but the compressed maneuver had tightened spacing temporarily. Two ships nearly crossed wakes before correcting. Torpedo officers worked furiously to establish firing solutions, but range remained uncertain. The Americans were still just beyond reliable visual targeting distance. Radar-assisted torpedo alignment existed, but not with the same refinement. Another American broadside thundered across black water. This time the shells struck closer to the flagship. A near miss showered the bridge with fragments. Communications circuits flickered. Searchlights finally caught a faint silhouette on the far horizon, a dark mass against darker sea. But illumination revealed only part of the American formation. Not all of it, because the secondary unit remained outside the cone of light. The Japanese fleet now faced layered fire. Turning further east would deepen exposure to the south. Turning south would re-expose the east. Maintaining straight course would allow continued bracketing. The silence, declared earlier in the night, had transformed into structured violence from multiple bearings. American radar operators did not need to see flames to adjust aim. They saw vectors. They saw convergence. They saw a fleet mid-maneuver. And mid-maneuver is when ships are most predictable. The Japanese admiral ordered a partial disengagement westward, a temporary withdrawal to widen spacing and restore command clarity. But withdrawal requires synchronized acceleration. And acceleration under radar fire is difficult to coordinate. As engines surged, the formation stretched unevenly. And stretched formations are easier to isolate. The night that looked empty had become a grid of intersecting lines. And every line was closing. By 34 hours, Japanese guns were firing continuously. Flashes burst across the formation as cruisers and destroyers answered the unseen attackers. Shells arced toward radar bearings rather than confirmed silhouettes. Water columns erupted along the eastern horizon, some close, some wildly off. The problem was not courage. It was synchronization. Each Japanese ship now interpreted the battle slightly differently. The lead cruiser prioritized the eastern contact. A destroyer on the southern edge engaged flashes glimpsed in partial illumination. The flagship attempted to centralize fire orders, but communications lagged beneath the concussion of near misses. Return salvos did not arrive in coordinated waves. They arrived in fragments. American radar plotted those fragments easily. On U.S. plotting boards, Japanese firing arcs appeared as momentary flashes of return clutter, revealing orientation and intention. Fire control officers adjusted accordingly, shifting aim toward ships whose guns exposed their positions most clearly. Radar does not merely see targets. It sees behavior. The Americans exploited that insight. A coordinated American salvo struck the Japanese lead cruiser again, this time disabling a primary director tower. The ship's return fire faltered immediately. Without precise range correction, its shells fell increasingly wide. A destroyer attempted to lay smoke to obscure the formation. But smoke blocks sight, not radar. American shells continued landing through the haze. The Southern American unit tightened its bearing further, compressing the engagement space. The Japanese fleet, now stretched between attempted withdrawal and active engagement, found its geometry increasingly unstable. Mid-turn corrections multiplied. Speed harmonization broke down. Two ships nearly overlapped firing arcs before emergency adjustments separated them. On the flagship, the admiral understood the underlying shift. The Americans were dictating tempo. The Japanese were reacting. Tempo in naval combat is measured in seconds, seconds between detection and fire, seconds between maneuver and correction. Radar shortened American cycles dramatically. Darkness lengthened Japanese ones. Another American broadside erupted, landing along the flank of a cruiser attempting to disengage westward. The ship's speed dropped sharply. Flames climbed into night air. The formation compressed again to protect the wounded vessel. Compression increased radar clarity for the Americans. What had begun as an illusion of silence was now an unmistakable pattern. Every attempt to restore order fed the enemy's targeting solutions. The Japanese fleet had declared the night secure. Now the night belonged to the side that could see without light. And as return fire lost rhythm, the engagement tilted decisively, not through louder guns, but through clearer information. By 41 hours, the Japanese flagship faced an unambiguous reality. Continuing the fight on current bearings meant incremental destruction. A cruiser ahead was burning heavily. One destroyer had fallen out of alignment after losing propulsion. Fire control synchronization was fractured. Radar returns were cluttered and unstable. The Americans, meanwhile, maintained disciplined spacing and clean targeting cycles. The admiral issued the order: disengage west, maximum coordinated speed. It was not retreat born of panic. It was tactical necessity. Engines surged across the formation. Smoke poured from funnels as ships attempted to widen distance rapidly and escape the intersecting arcs. But disengagement under radar fire is not simple. As the Japanese fleet accelerated westward, American radar tracked the speed increase instantly. Fire control solutions updated within seconds. The Americans did not chase blindly. They adjusted firing angles to exploit the withdrawal vector. The Southern American cruiser group increased speed slightly, not to overtake recklessly, but to maintain pressure on the retreating flank. Shells landed along the trailing ships first. A damaged cruiser attempting to accelerate could not match formation speed. Its lag exposed it further. American salvos concentrated deliberately, isolating the slowest hull. Within minutes, the crippled vessel fell behind entirely, engulfed in fire. The remaining Japanese ships faced another decision: slow to screen the damaged cruiser, or preserve fleet integrity. They preserved the fleet. The formation tightened around surviving core units and continued westward at high speed, sacrificing the straggler. American ships maintained radar lock but did not pursue beyond calculated risk boundaries. The objective had not been annihilation, it had been disruption and dominance. The earlier declaration, "Night secure," now felt distant and costly. Darkness had not protected the fleet. It had concealed the repositioning enemy. As the distance widened gradually, American gunfire slowed. Salvos became selective, ensuring pressure without overextension. Radar returns elongated as range increased. By 23:02 hours, the Japanese fleet had broken effective gunnery contact. The sea quieted again. But this time, no one mistook the silence for safety. The engagement had proven something irreversible. Darkness no longer guaranteed concealment. Distance no longer guaranteed disengagement. The fleet that could see first and fire first owned the night. The Japanese warships had declared the sea silent. Radar had revealed movement everywhere. And before a single silhouette appeared on the horizon, the battle had already been decided. By 23:08 hours, the Japanese fleet had widened range enough to escape immediate destruction, but not enough to disappear. American radar continued to paint the withdrawing formation in clean, separated echoes. The U.S. task groups did not charge recklessly into the darkness. Instead, they maintained measured speed, preserving formation geometry while extending controlled pressure. This was not pursuit born of emotion. It was surveillance with teeth. Every few minutes, American cruisers loosed deliberate salvos at maximum effective range, not to destroy outright, but to keep the retreat disciplined and costly. Each shell forced Japanese captains to maintain evasive turns, burning fuel and stretching coordination. On the Japanese flagship, tension remained high. Withdrawal required synchronization. Damaged vessels lagged. Destroyers alternated between screening and towing preparations for wounded ships that could not keep pace. Radar aboard Japanese vessels showed American contacts still holding structured alignment. They were not scattering. They were shadowing. The earlier assumption that darkness equalized advantage had dissolved. The Americans did not need searchlights or flares. Their situational awareness persisted without visual confirmation. By 23:21 hours, the range widened beyond consistent heavy gun effectiveness. The American commander made the calculated decision not to pursue further west. Fuel state, potential air threat at dawn, and mission scope dictated restraint. The Japanese fleet continued retreating into open ocean. But the psychological cost lingered. The battle had restarted from nothing, triggered not by sight, but by radar contact beyond perception. The Japanese had not been outgunned initially. They had been outinformed. The night was quiet again. This time, no one declared it secure. Shortly after midnight, the Japanese flagship transmitted an updated summary to higher command. The language had changed. No mention of secured waters. No reference to completed engagement. Instead, enemy re-engaged under radar cover, multiple bearings, damage sustained, withdrawing to regroup. It was a factual report, but the shift in tone carried weight. Commanders reviewing the engagement would note the sequence carefully. Initial contact, perceived disengagement, radar returns dismissed, sudden multi-axis fire. The vulnerability had not been firepower disparity. It had been premature certainty. On American vessels, after-action notes reflected disciplined execution. Radar coordination between task groups had allowed convergence without visual exposure. Fire control cycles had remained uninterrupted throughout darkness. The engagement became a case study almost immediately. Silence does not equal absence, and radar erases distance as protection. For the Japanese fleet, the lesson was sharper. Darkness had once been an ally, especially in Pacific surface warfare, where night torpedo tactics were refined and deadly. Now, radar had inverted that advantage. Night favored the side with clearer electronic sight. By dawn, smoke still lingered faintly on the western horizon. The Japanese fleet had escaped annihilation, but not disruption. Damaged ships required repair. Fuel reserves were reduced from evasive acceleration. Morale was intact but sobered. The Americans, meanwhile, retained operational flexibility. Their formation had held structure throughout. The battle illustrated a fundamental shift in naval warfare. Engagement no longer began when ships saw each other. It began when radar resolved geometry. The Americans had disengaged visually only to reassemble electronically. The Japanese had interpreted silence as conclusion. That interpretation cost them initiative. The Pacific Night had once concealed maneuver. In 1944, it concealed only the side without radar advantage. The Japanese fleet's early assumption that no enemy units remained nearby was not irrational. Visually, the sea was empty. Sonar revealed nothing immediate. No engines roared within sight. But radar painted a different truth. The Americans saw structure where the Japanese saw absence. And in warfare, perception shapes tempo. Once gunfire erupted before visual contact, the psychological advantage shifted permanently. Crews realized that darkness was no longer neutral ground. It was contested space. The Japanese warships declared the night silent. Radar showed movement everywhere. That contradiction defined the battle. No dramatic chase. No surprise fleet appearing from fog. Just disciplined repositioning beyond sight and precise re-engagement guided by electronic clarity. The sea had looked empty. It was not. The lesson was not about louder guns or heavier armor. It was about who saw first. In modern naval warfare, silence can be a tactic, but it can also be a trap. And on that September night in 1944, the trap was sprung not by searchlights, but by signals invisible to the eye. The night was never truly silent. It was simply being measured.